Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the talk. This is my the second time I've appeared at TechTalks, and it's been great. And I'd like to thank the organisers and the volunteers, and great for the opportunity to come and speak about threat intelligence and cybersecurity, kind of changing up the vibe from more of the software development and software engineering. So basically, yeah, so we may as well crack on. So just to get some housekeeping, so who am I? So I'm Cottam, so I work as a security operations analyst at Baillie Gifford in their internal security team. I've been in the industry probably around about 3 years now, coming up to September this year. In my previous employments, I was more managed security service providers at Dharma, which was no longer present anymore, and as well as Cottam Cyber. So kind of more of the back end of helping clients and helping them tackle security threats and look at ways to improve kind of automation, as well as security posture from a service provider side. But I was kind of more passionate to go more into the internal team and build up their own cybersecurity posture and help kind of perform kind of detection engineering, threat intelligence, and kind of more proactive defense. So what I kind of do there, track threat actors, build detections, hunt for things. But to kind of give a reference back to the previous talk, so Alexander, showed us how to use AI, different optimizations in terms of tokens, OpenClaw, PicoClaw, NanoClaw, those are the other type of ones as well. So basically that means it's kind of become more, everyone's getting like artificial intelligence at your fingertips. Everyone's got proper intelligence, more or less. So that then, in terms from a cybersecurity perspective, makes you yourself the target. So your packages, your NPM, PyPI, GitHub Actions, that becomes a target towards threat actors to kind of compromise your kind of automation, your pipelines, your infrastructure. Your laptop as well as a target. SSH keys, passwords, cloud tokens, cloud sessions. The occasional password text file that's in somewhere in a folder that's been dormant for years. And more worrying is your cloud environment. The previous trends over the last few years, it's been mostly on-prem servers, but now as we move more to cloud, like AWS, GCP, Azure, that becomes more of a target now for the whole cloud infrastructure base. So your IAM roles, your OAuth scopes for applications, and your CDI and CI secrets. So what is threat intelligence? So it's more of an evidence-based knowledge about people, threat actor groups, tools, and motives. So it's trying to turn consolidated information into informed decisions to help protect both your company, your employees, and whether like your customer base, your clients, to show that trust that you take security seriously. So it's basically kind of more of a structured source validated of information. It's about actors, it's not just indicators, artifacts like high Ps, file hashes, or say random posts. It's more structured in that sense. And it fuels decisions, whether it's what detections do we have in place that we haven't had in place yet, any patching that we need to do immediately on any any kind of vulnerabilities that have been reported to be exploited in the wild, and any type of prevention policies that we need to implement in our cloud infrastructure or as an organizational procedure prevention. And lastly, hunting. So hunting threats in your network, in your estate. You'll be surprised at the many cases of kind of threat actors hiding in the network of companies, which I'll come to that later down in the slides. What kind of threat intelligence is sometimes perceived when it's not just the occasional doom scrolling on Twitter or X, as it's now called now, and Telegram. And it's not like a magic feed that's going to predict breaches. You reading like 2 articles is not going to be kind of predicting what's the next move. It's a lot more nuanced in that sense. It's more expanding the knowledge and more consolidating and grouping information together. And it's not a substitute for security fundamentals. So you still need that whole kind of technology fundamental, but also the security side of it, of what is the secure approach to this? Have you thought about this with implementing a new change or any new software? It's about still thinking about those fundamentals. You don't disregard that, because that's where your foundational knowledge comes from. So in terms of threat intelligence, it's I could describe it in terms of 3 pillars, right? Strategic, operational, and tactical. So I'll start at the bottom. So we've got tactical here. that essentially looks for more of this is more the security operations side of things. So IOCs, identifying any type of artifacts that we might have seen in our network, so any suspicious connections to IP addresses or domains, certain malware families. Is there any malware that's targeting a specific sector or neighboring kind of institutions that are within your kind of industry, and kind of analyzing the behavioral side of it and trying to determine, do our current security tools kind of detect that, and as well as attack patterns, which goes in line with the behavioral side. And above that is operational. So this is more like your cybersecurity, threat intelligence managers in the war room discussing with each other who's attacking us, who's attacking our neighboring companies, stuff like that, and trying to understand what are the more emerging campaigns that are increasing as of late. So whether that be, whether that be kind of impersonation attempts of your CEO, your CFO, any specific targeting towards employees in, say, like development, identity access management, or certain like legal, the typical kind of roles. So it's kind of more understanding operational side of things. Are we capable to kind of tackle this attack or prevent the like similar kind of incidents that have happened to neighboring kind of industries? And then lastly, strategic. So this is more your kind of business side of things with your chief information security officer. They'll be looking at more of the geopolitical side and long-term actor goals. So with the geopolitical stuff, we've got the Iran, Israel, US conflict at the moment, as well as Russia and Ukraine. So a lot of organizations will look at the kind of strategic side of that in terms of, supply chain, any kind of companies they work with, maybe not necessarily in those regions, but the neighboring regions especially, and any kind of threat actor groups that might go and target similar companies in the sector. So with the Iran conflict, a lot of Iranian hacktivists will kind of consolidated together with other Russian groups to target kind of neighboring financial institutions and other companies in the neighboring regions, like in Israel and like Qatar and stuff. So that itself you wouldn't ignore as much, because that could easily pivot towards the UK and the US markets. So that is kind of the three pillars there, and they all kind of coincide together to build that whole threat intelligence workflow. So I briefly mentioned kind of hacktivists, organized crime. These are the type of groups that we kind of track typically in threat intelligence. So malicious insiders. So as kind of with the current climate, with like jobs, kind of the demand for jobs increasing, there's not enough demand, and a lot of times companies are outsourcing to kind of other countries that might not necessarily have the track record of being paid well. That opens to the vector of malicious insiders, where it could allow for them to be easily bribed, to give them access to like any certain tools or any support kind of authentication. And then organized crime, so ransomware. So I imagine some people may have been aware of like the WannaCry incident that happened years ago to the NHS, where it was ransomware was deployed, and it was kind of more had to pay that ransom to like the systems, and they're still recovering to this day from that incident. As well as state-sponsored groups, so North Korea, Russia, ones that have quite financial backing to kind of perform their campaigns without having to worry about, developing tools or buying anything off the dark web. And then various other ones as well. There is one group, you probably noticed there's a card missing here. So that is reserved for APT groups. So they're probably the more sophisticated lot of it. And it kind of blends in with these other kind of groups as well, mainly state-sponsored and organized crime. So their overall goal is stealth, long-term, and well-resourced. So what do I mean by that? So they're basically kind of sophisticated, well-resourced. They are sometimes often state-sponsored, but not always. They're not your typical group where they're going like, when they basically, we've hacked into your device or your infrastructure, we're going to destroy everything and leave. No, they'll hide in your network. They'll try to understand the behavior and try to match it to avoid your current detection mechanism. So we'll go for a couple examples. We've got Lazarus Group. So they're a North Korean linked threat actor group that are mainly known for financial heists, crypto exchange attacks, and you might see more recently with like fake interviews or disguising themselves as legitimate like IT workers. I don't know if anyone has seen like kind of this Australian video that did an investigation into a North Korean actor, and they had this guy applying for the company, and the way they determined he was obviously like his CV and his profile picture, they submitted not him. It was probably, I think it was like an African-American guy, and then the person that turned up in the interview was a North Korean person. So they instantly knew it's like, you're not matching the profile picture you gave to us. And the one question they asked, and this has been seen from other IT kind of infiltration attempts, is they ask them to insult North Korea or Kim Jong-un. And at that point, as soon as they say, do you hate Kim Jong-un or that, they'll say, oh, I don't know who that is, I'm not familiar with him, or they'll just leave the call. Because I feel like there'll be more punishment if they start making fun of the regime. So I would recommend definitely finding those videos on YouTube and stuff. They're a good watch, and it gives you more of a kind of idea behind their motives, and the fact they're using AI as well to mask their whole appearance as well in some campaigns. And the next one, which I imagine most people will be familiar with this, especially with last year coming up to the year mark, was Scattered Spider. So they're kind of more treated as social engineering specialists. They're very young. They're more kind of your 20 to 30s kind of range of like kind of threat actors. So, and they're mostly kind of UK, US based. So they have that advantage of understanding the time zones of where users are at, what they're doing, as well in terms of social engineering. A lot of time it's kind of voice phishing, or vision as it's called, and they obviously, the traditional type of like scam callers are not, they're like not likely to be detectable or like seen as like scammers, and they basically more or less attack like help desk people. So to go more deeper into that, in terms of the Lazarus group, this is a good one about hiding in your network for the 2016 classic Bangladesh bank. So what this was a Lazarus Group campaign that targeted this bank in Bangladesh. And this basically was before they pivoted to crypto in the exchange. This was probably before crypto became mainstream, as you would say now. They started off essentially performing reconnaissance towards the bank, trying to identify any possible targets on their employee base. And then they performed kind of spear phishing to send a malicious attachment to the user in the hopes that they download it, they click it, they install malware in the machine, boom, they've got access. Now what do? They live in the network. They're trying to understand what's the behavioral side of things. And you can see there, what I mean by dwell time inside the network, 16 months they lived in the Bangladesh's network. So it can be a scary thought, especially in some organizations, because it makes you wonder, is there any threat actors in our company? Which comes into the whole threat hunting side of things. But 16 months is probably a crazy time to live in the bank. You don't know what the security stack. I feel in 2016, security, in terms of security posture and stuff, there wasn't much of, like in terms of EDR or endpoint detection solutions at the time, wasn't really that much of a big thing. It was more like you're seeing more analyzing logs manually, so it was kind of more difficult in that sense to detect it. So they lived in the network, they performed kind of 35 request transfers and made away with £951 million. In an attempt that was stopped, but they actually got away with 81 million. Apologies. So yeah, and they connected to 4 Swift servers, and they're quite good. They're quite sensitive data, obviously, in terms of banking. And access to 4 of them unmonitored basically was like getting a golden ticket in like Willy Wonka's factory, you know what I mean? They had unrestricted access to these servers to perform this type of transfer. So this is, you might have heard my question before in the previous talk about persistence. This is the example of it in terms of having persistence onto a user's thing. And this was purely from researching in terms of what the user they wanted to target, deliver certain spear phishing. One employee fakes job CV, keylogger installed, so they were obviously, this could have been probably an admin or an IT or sysadmin user. They're logging into these various networks, RDP in, they're gonna have the guy's credentials, they're gonna have the connections, then at that point they're gonna try and figure out how to replicate that and get in. So that was their old method. They were targeting banks. There's a movie about this as well. I can't remember the specific movie, but it's quite a good famous story about Lazarus Group. The evolution of it now is crypto. So they've more pivoted towards still performing the same type of attack method of fake interviews, recruitment campaigns, where they'll disguise themselves as a recruiter on LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed, those type of websites, pose a job recruiter for roles specifically related to crypto, so whether it be on the blockchain, the Web3, like working with Web3, that type of end. They're trying to lure crypto enthusiasts because that's where they think they're going to make most of the money. Similar to the tactic before the Bangladesh, they just changed the method, changed like the scope of what they're targeting from financial companies to more crypto enthusiasts, crypto exchanges. So recently, which I'll come on to in a moment, is the more like malicious NPM PyPy packages as well that they've been doing recently, and collaborating with Russian nationals. So there's both in terms of cyber side, they work with like Russian like state-sponsored groups as well, but in terms of more of a geopolitical side, North Korea's been reported to obviously send their own troops to help Russia with the Ukraine conflict. So in terms of that side of things, it's kind of both, you see the physical and cyber side of the collaboration with Russia. And the more famous one that we've seen more recently is the 1.5 billion that was stolen from Bybit, so the crypto exchange service. I think in terms of how they compromised it, it was from like an exchange wallet from a user, and then they managed to pivot to get into the Bybit and then exfiltrate, kind of manipulate a transfer to get that load of money. And then in terms of this is funding the regime, the North Korean regime. So this is why you'll see more advancements in their type and their capability as a country overall is from campaigns like this where they get the funding to basically perform this. But then how does threat intelligence come into play in here? So it's more peer sharing with like sector channels. So various companies in other sectors might have these like groups or like information security groups as well that they'll consolidate and share information with other companies. There could be one company that's seen like a malicious campaign that they'll share with other companies to basically kind of alert you earlier and to prevent them, because some companies might not have the same maturity as other financial institutions, whether, and not even just financial institutions, but just companies in general, due to either resources, lack of kind of staff, or not having like the correct controls in place. And then tactical intel is traded, so IOCs, so IPs, malicious senders, known attachments, and behavioral side of things will be shared across. And then kind of discussing any, like, what's the next motive for the actor. So they're obviously doing a campaign towards recruitment and CV fake interview attempts. So should you monitor more closely with like these interview sites like Greenhouse, Indeed? Do you think there should be like a more responsibility on their side to, you know, scrutinize people that sign up to these sites as recruiters? That's the kind of the big thing now. And I guess with NPM stuff, it's more how much do you trust like open source packages now? You can install in the package one day, it's clean, it's legitimate, and then the guy's going to get compromised 2 weeks later. And if you have an auto update feature, you're going to get compromised. But I'll talk about that more in a second. So this is just more Lazarus Group in terms of cybersecurity companies sometimes call them by different names. So Microsoft likes to give the name of like Storm followed by various numbers. CrowdStrike likes to give it a very fancy name for some of them. So Colima is basically the Lazarus Group, but it's split down to 3 separate operations where you have the Golden Chalama, which is more the objective of crypto theft, same with Pressure Coloma, and Labyrinth acts as the intelligence collection side of things to gather more of your reconnaissance, more intel of potential targets. The only difference between the Golden and Pressure is probably the slight variation in malware, but also the target. So they'll target more of the small fintech firms in US and Canada, but Pressure will go for more centralized exchanges, technology, US, India, stuff like that. And then Labyrinth will do probably intelligence space for the regime in terms of defense, military, government, oil and gas. Excuse me. So that's kind of the breakdown of that. There's many other thousands of threat groups, like hundreds of threat groups like this. But Lazarus one's probably the more infamous one, known for like how sophisticated it is and the type of feats they've done in terms of compromises. So moving on to the Scattered Spider in the UK retail industry. I feel like we can all remember last year going to like the Co-op, M&S, shelves were basically unstocked, there was no deliveries, it caused online disruption. That is kind of how, I feel like that's probably the more closer to home cyber attack that the non kind of, you know, technology cyber people in the UK have came across, because it hits to home in terms of that. So social engineering via help desks, there was no vulnerabilities, there was no certain like malware they didn't phish, they just specifically targeted help desk and knew how to think like as a person calling in for a request. They're quite sophisticated. They sometimes use AI to mask that they're in a certain like say they're in an airport, they need their credentials, their MFA to be reset. So they're trying to basically pressure the help desk. And sometimes help desks can be really overwhelmed. If anyone's worked in a help desk before, it can be quite overwhelming. And like sometimes when you get an executive that comes in with a request, he's like, you need to do this now or we're losing business. So at that point, it's a procedural problem, it's a process issue that they need to kind of fix, which Scattered Spider took that advantage of it and managed to compromise major UK retail organizations within a short span of time. So And again, similar way to war, like how threat intel respond to this was sharing kind of infrastructure, artifacts, sharing kind of what's your process with help desk, are they up to date, which kind of goes in line with the last point there in terms of rather like asking yourself, are you vulnerable, are we, you know, a target? It's more, are we already in scope? So it's more is like, is your procedures correct? Are help desk following certain checks? Are they verifying identities when people call up and ask for kind of, I want my password reset, I want my account enabled. It's more ensuring that. It's not more like, are we vulnerable? It's like, are people following the correct procedures? Are security tools up to date, and could we detect any potential like social engineering attempts? Because it goes beyond from phishing now. It goes more like personal towards calling and tricking a user, because it only takes one user, and whether that's a very good, it could have a very good user, but if he's had, say, lack of sleep, bad day, other things going on in life, it's that mentality thing that will trick people to that they'll trick in order to get access. So it's like something to consider with that. And more recently, one of them did get arrested. This 24-year-old based in Scotland, he was in Dundee, funny enough. He was arrested recently by the government and looking to get obviously charged now by the US for the crimes that he's committed. So it's kind of an interesting story to keep up with that in terms of what will happen with that specific person. So we've talked about threat actors, we've talked about groups. I kind of briefly mentioned NPM and PyPy packages. So I think the next thing, especially if you've been more like software engineers and dev, packages have been a lot of compromises in the past few weeks. So this is when it comes to more like supply chain becomes a weapon now. So your NPM, PyPy packages are becoming more of an attack vector now for threat actors. What they'll typically do is try and compromise the maintainer, whether it's through phishing, social engineering, or hijacking their account. Sometimes, depending on the package and the user, it could be a popular open source project that's not used anymore, that's not supported, or like they've just lost interest. They could come along and say, hey, we want to buy this project from you, can we be the main maintainers? And they'll be like, sure, here you go. They're not going to know if it's a bad person or not. They're trusting, they're pretty much done with it. They're just going to get the money, which allows the threat actor to move into the next step in terms of publishing their malicious version that ships everywhere, that will probably auto-install in people's systems depending on how you've configured it. Because sometimes users could have, sometimes I'm myself, Kelly's like, sometimes I typically don't update packages at home when I'm trying to code and stuff, so you see that one update, it's like, I need to update that. But in more like enterprise and organizations, you'll probably have the auto-install because that's preventing kind of, you know, your vulnerabilities in terms of like applications and stuff. And then what that allows for threat actors, essentially, once they compromise these packages, is to exfiltrate any secrets, API keys, anything to kind of get more of that external access on their end, and allows a backdoor onto your development machines. And sometimes your EDR might not pick up straight away, because again, that's a whole behavioral analysis. If the infrastructure is very new, sometimes it won't identify immediately that this is a malicious infrastructure or the malicious IP, or like malicious kind of behavior, what this package is doing, because at this point it'd be in your system for a long time. It knows what the behavior is like until it changes it up. So that's kind of the one thing as well. And as well with the Notepad, as well on the Notepad++ incident that happened a few months ago last year, that was more infrastructure compromise via the update kind of process. So allowed that certain customers, mostly kind of in Taiwan and like kind of Argentina, so you can kind of guess who the threat actor behind that group was, especially with Taiwan. That in itself was kind of the supply chain. So this is kind of how I wanted to kind of summarize the year of supply chain. So the supply chain burns, so I kind of make it more of a dramatic title, to be honest. We can see in like the start of August 2025, we had the Singularity or NX kind of compromise, where it was probably the more infamous one for AI being used for more reconnaissance-based work. So that typically kind of the more low-hanging fruit in terms of performance scanning towards like infrastructure, environments, stuff like that. It's kind of that specific compromise became more known for that type of measure, or like that type of method. Next, we had the chalk and debug kind of compromise as well. Literally, like less than a month after this one. 18 packages, 2.6 billion weekly downloads. It was basically a massive crypto wallet drainer that looked for, identified whenever users pasted their wallet address when they're making transactions, and basically changed the paste to redirect to the threat actor's wallet. And the user probably wouldn't have realized as it is, because it's stealthily doing this in the back end. And in September 15th, we probably heard of Shai-Hulud, self-replicating worm, target a large number of packages, and it basically allowed to set, basically the fact that it's self-replicating, it's going to go through your entire environment, and it'll be quite difficult to get. So it's probably the more infamous one that's probably happened in that year, in 2025. And then we have its sequel, Shai-Hulud 2.0, pre-install hook, 25K plus repos. Certain other popular repos like Postman and Zapper were probably potentially affected by it. Again, same process, self-replicating worm, it's going through your network, it's going through the environment. It's, I imagine for some people here, if you work with a lot of NPM packages and PyPy, you probably had like a fun 2025 or on-call stuff, I imagine. And then we move fast forward to this year. So we have Team PCP, quite an infamous one for kind of compromising Trevi, Light LLM, Telnex, within reach pretty much as well. More recently today, they've making claims that they've compromised the CLI for Bitwarden. So that came out today as a potential compromise on their end. So this is quite a very more sophisticated resource group. They've become more known in the space now because they've just came out of nowhere. They've compromised these packages quite quickly. Again, now it's more of your business side of things of like, okay, we need to maybe have controls in place of developers downloading packages, even if it's for testing or creating applications. Next, we have probably the last two are probably the more famous ones, if you can guess the next one after this one. So Axios, so weekly downloads, it's linked to it's linked to Lazarus Group. They basically tricked a developer with a fake interview, job CV. They joined a fake Zoom call, downloaded this malicious application that was supposedly meant to fix the Zoom call, which allowed them to basically get access to this maintainer's account and basically shipped out a couple of versions of Axios that basically allowed for them to, once installed, connects to their infrastructure. So again, Axios is probably more popular than some of the ones I've mentioned already, and especially like when it comes to AI agents or making your custom ones, it's kind of used for that as well as a lot of automation opportunities as well. And the last one, which probably came out this week, the Versal compromise. So more different side of things, rather than like an NPM or PyPy packages, it was more of an OAuth third-party compromise via this Context AI company, which I'll have a slide discussing it further, but that was essentially the more recent one, and which is more used for more of your documentation and storing stuff working with AI as well. So we kind of talked about like the supply chain. Okay, so supply chain, third-party compromises, that's the type of things now that are more the risks in cyber, because you can have an EDR solution like CrowdStrike or Microsoft Defender that might be good at behavioral side and they might be secure. So now they're not pivoting towards more of your packages and your cloud infrastructure now, because that's not going to get detected by EDR unless you have certain policies in place. Next, on to the other, in terms of more looking at the strategic side of things for the geopolitics is the threat vector. I've mentioned already with the Iran, USA and Israel conflict, the alliance of kind of threat actor groups. So Iranian hacktivists are probably working with more of the Russian side of groups in terms of targeting more Middle Eastern companies. And people are probably aware of like Iran bombing kind of data centers in data centers in the Middle East. And it's probably more, again, it's probably that you look at the side of things of like they're causing disruption, they're trying to, cause operations, but also used by these groups as well to identify what tools companies are using. So if they're using tools that are AWS and they're reporting they've got an outage, they're like, okay, so we kind of know what your cloud infrastructure is already like, you know what I mean? So in that sense, they'll take that information and try and do the more of the reconnaissance side of things and try to identify it and kind of perform that compromise. And in turn as well, we got Russia and Ukraine, especially with the more infamous group of No Name 0557. So they typically kind of communicate more on Telegram. They're Russian hacktivists that will target kind of countries, organizations, institutions that don't agree with like the Russian kind of, kind of politics, the ideology. So their main thing is more disruption. So they'll do like kind of DDoS attacks towards like companies. It's more of your government institutions that will try and target. But they have targeted in the past financial institutions, oil and gas, transport. It depends what is more their kind of what's kind of on their target. What's their method basically. So in terms of monitoring this side of things, so we have a thing called, there's the things called threat intelligent platforms, or TIPs as the acronym's kind of called. So that kind of gives the foundation of more consolidating information. You could have millions of threat intel feeds and IPs and stuff. You need this type of tool to consolidate it all into one that allows you to review individual artifacts, read reports, read security research and malware reports as well, and monitor forums like the dark web, info stealer logs, and Telegram channels. Telegram's a popular application for threat actors to basically boast about their fee or who their next targets are going to be. So with this type of tool, it allows you to enrich your security kind of posture and like your information, so enrich alerts, what actors are targeting you, essentially. And there's a couple examples, so Record Future, Threat Connect, or more of your commercial branded threatening tools that do broad coverage. Some of them have like, you know, the pros and cons, heavy automation, more workflows with Analyst Collab. As well, in terms of for the open source side, there's OpenCTI and MISP. They're community-driven open source tools that will allow basically anyone to kind of set up their kind of own threat tool without having to pay like kind of thousands of pounds for a threat intel tool. Again, it depends on your resource and how much kind of allocated stuff you've got for this tool, for your security budget, essentially. So that's kind of an example of like Threat Connect here. So you've got your indicator, which is this random kind of URL, the source of where it came from. Is it an active indicator set by Threat Connect, or it could be manually set as well? Details of the indicator, so this is obviously a critical threat here, with the threat rating being high. The confidence of it being a malicious kind of URL is 100%. Date and time, because sometimes, I'll come on to a second why these two are quite important to have, as well as associations, which could be other infrastructure tied to it, like is the threat actor revolving IPs around this domain, or is there any kind of subdomains or any redirects that have been reported in terms of associated with this specific indicator. Again, this type of UI varies across different threat intel tools. This kind of gives a good overview of what kind of IOC, like in terms of a typical IOC. But sometimes there is the trap of like your threat intel tool is like, that's all we need. We don't need to look at anything. It's not like that. It's more builds that foundational threat intelligence platform for companies to look at. But there's so much more in the landscape other than just TIP tools, because threat intelligence platform tools can only pick up so much. So we go into, in terms of other examples, you've got quarterly threat reports. So CrowdStrike, Mandarin, Microsoft, other cybersecurity companies in the space will typically publish deep analysis of emerging threat actors and campaigns and trends that they've seen. As well, I've mentioned dwell time earlier. They'll sometimes do their own analysis itself of how dwell time has been like within their recent observations. And then the next is like OSINT, or open source threat intelligence. Or blogs and researchers. So you have independent researchers that probably go out and research threats, identify stuff, and post it on like Twitter or their blog, or like popular sites like Bleeping Computer, Cybersecurity News. Those type of blogs are good information for getting the general stuff out, and then you go deeper in the technical side of things. So that's a good source in terms of more your kind of cybersecurity feeds as well. Like X and Mastodon are popular as well for this. And next, this is more kind of closed off type of ISACs or sector groups. So FS-ISAC, for example, is the financial services like cybersecurity group. So companies will pay to be in this type of membership, and it'll be more of a close set, more curated sources and data, and allows more wider or financial organizations to come together and share anything that's in trending, whether it be cyber specific or tech. So like Claude Mythos, for example, has been the recent topic with how it's very capable of doing like security research and vulnerability. Again, that's a grave concern within like the space. And as well, it's like every sector will have like their own specific type of group, whether it's the FS-ISAC or it'll be different other ones. Often more they're kind of paid, but there will be probably free groups to join. But again, that's just more kind of networking and communicating and collaboration. That's the big thing with threat intelligence, is collaboration. Not with your team, with other teams, other organizations, and just the wider kind of space, really. So this is kind of an example of a CrowdStrike Global Threat Report. So again, the fastest time in e-crime has broken out on record. So it's taken like a threat actor kind of 27 seconds, quite quickly. Very, very fast in terms of the last few years it's been reported, where it's been a couple of minutes, now it's down to seconds. Probably with the acceleration of AI has helped it as well with threat actors in terms of getting in and out, building like workflows. 40% of vulnerabilities have been exploited by China towards like edge devices, due to as well as like lack of monitoring. 266% increase in cloud kind of intrusions. Again, that's going back to the trend of we're moving from on-prem to more cloud-based solutions. This allows more of an attack approach. Well, if all your data is in the cloud, we'll just try and get into the cloud essentially. And just kind of trends about threat actors in nation states. So 100% increase in North Korea incidents have included in large single financial theft. Again, that's the Bybit incident that's attributed to that. And 89% increase in attacks by AI-enabled adversaries. So again, we're all using AI agents, whether it's to improve automation, proof stuff, proofread, write your emails, stuff like that. Threat actors are obviously doing this as well. They're more doing it for malware creation in terms of either jailbreaking systems and trying to create their own malware. Interestingly, I was at an industry event a few weeks ago, and one of the kind of cybersecurity threat intelligence researchers has said like they've observed threat actors using like Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, and they're creating malware to integrate into their workflow, but it's getting detected quite easily. And that's probably attributed to they're trying to test it out. They're trying to see, we'll create this malware, we'll see how easy it gets caught. If it gets caught, okay, we need to rework the prompt, we need to build stuff, we need to review it. So it's like your whole trial error, you're kind of that approach of trial and error. We refine your prompt for your workflow. They're doing the exact same thing for malware, essentially. So with the infostealer economy, so typical, this is kind of more occurred when like infections occur when like users are downloading cracked software, whether it be like tools like Adobe is quite popular for, quite a common one for people to do, or they've been tricked into phishing or malversed, which is basically a threat actor will pay for ad space on like say Google and kind of push their own kind of typo squatted domain. So Claude, for example, they'll be like, they might try and pay for like kind of advertising spaces on websites and basically hopes that you click on this ad and it will go to their infrastructure, which will likely lead to a phishing page or potential malware being dropped onto your machine. As well as kind of just harvesting kind of passwords, session cookies, MFA tokens, as well as a common thing part of this economy. And the goal of it is to sell it, realistically. It's going to be, there'll be a post on either the Russian markets, Telegram channels, or underground forums. Popular one like breach forums typically is one that pops up every time and again because it gets taken down and then it's quickly spun back up by a new person hosting it. And the goal of it is to sell initial access, it's like held by initial access brokers. They'll try and sell you access, whether it be RDP, SSO tokens to this company's environment. Again, this is going back to the legitimacy and validating this information, because sometimes threat actors will publish, I've breached this company, please buy this access, but it turns out the data they're selling is data that was from 2 years old, and it'll be useless at this point. Well, you would hope so. It depends if they've rolled the creds or not. Which is a worrying thing, but yeah. But like the average kind of credential appearing in a steal log from a ransomware incident, for example, is 2 days. And that's from various sources, that's kind of from more of like your various sources have attributed that. Because infostealers could be from any type of source. And like browser extensions, IDE extensions, stuff like that. That's kind of more. And that's probably, these are like the more top active malware families in terms of like this year so far. So Vidar 2.0, so post Lumina disruption, Lumina C2, it's all these various types of C2 malware families that do slightly different things. Could do a whole day about talking about it, in depth about it, but that's kind of the gist of it in terms of those are the active families at the moment. So the reason why I brought up the infosteal economy is let's get to the Vercel breach. So how many people have like used Vercel? Like typically, anyone really use it for? Yeah, so some people, yeah. Cool. Yeah, prepare to be worried about this, how this happened. So you'll probably see, if you can see the graph in there, a Roblox cheat downloaded 2 months ago into the developer's platform. So I'm not joking. I am not joking. I think this just came out either today or yesterday, the news. But that is the flow of what happened. So it was a third-party compromise from a company called Context AI. That does probably a lot of work with like OpenAI, Claude OpenAI, sorry, and like other kind of SaaS AI products essentially, right? So an employee downloads a game exploit Trojan that drops, again, a Lumina stealer for Roblox in the personal account. So you could probably tell you would hope this is like their kid using their work laptop, surely. Like, why is a grown man like downloading like a Roblox extension. I'm not saying if you like the game, if you still play it, fair play, but it gets even crazier. So that's happened in February 2026, right? So then the creds got stolen for this user's, this Context AI's Google account. So that gave them access to their workspace, Superbase, and Datadog tokens. And this is all within like the stealer log. So the threat actors already got this data. It's probably been sold, it was sold on the Russian market. Bundles have surfaced in criminal markets. Obviously someone buys it in the end. This was in March. Again, there's sometimes these timelines, in terms of payment and stuff, it's also about, like, it's kind of more like based on of like what, threat intelligence, info-stealer logs, when was it dated. Usually info-stealer logs are quite dated with, like, when they've captured this data, so it helps build a timeline. So at that point, the logs get sold. Within the same month, a user creates the Context AI OAuth token is basically used on a Versal employee's Google account in terms of environment kind of variables, which this OAuth app has been this method has been used by a lot by Spider as well in terms of more like Salesforce, typically like Salesforce and Salesforce Drift has been used for a lot for OAuth compromises. Basically, you'll probably come across where you're using this application, you want to integrate into your cloud environment, you'll authorize it, and it'll probably have like certain permissions that will need to do these actions essentially. And sometimes with these permissions, it could be very overly excessive. It's trying to follow the more principle of least privilege is the approach for this. So what privilege do users really need? It'd be the same thing to apply for your kind of online applications and stuff within your cloud environment especially. And then at this point, they've already gotten access to the guy's environment, so they're trying to sell the data on breach forums, exfiltrated kind of databases, listing it for $2 million, and Versal disclosed it publicly. And a lot of times there was some scrutiny with the initial report that came out, because a lot of time when these companies get breached, they're finding out just as you are, in some cases. So sometimes they'll have to like legally disclose that they've had an incident. I believe in the UK it's like 48 hours that they have to tell their customers and publicly that they've been breached. So they obviously disclose that. They say they're still investigating it. They have a potential that it's an OAuth app. In terms of indicators, it was just more of the OAuth app like ID, which is okay. It's good to search in your Google Workspace, but it doesn't give you the name of it. It could be anything, in that sense. So there's a lot of things in terms of like the threat intelligence community on like Twitter and other like sources were kind of more annoyed with this threat report because it doesn't give you that much context to what's happened apart from there's a malicious OAuth app. So basically, to summarize the chain of it, personal browsing habits, corporate creds, OAuth, your customers' data. It's like you don't need a nation-state-sponsored attacker, you essentially just need a supply chain kit. And to target the right person, and then you absolutely compromise them, which is essentially not the good thing, because as we're using AI agents, more like CLIs and stuff, whenever we need a task, sometimes they'll be like, okay, I need to install this package in order to perform this task. Do you allow it? And sometimes you'll go, yeah. How often do people install packages with their CLI and review like the actual dependencies, the code of the package they're installing, whether it's like via cursor? Do many people actually do that? No, yeah. It's like you're in essentially because it would take a lot of time, especially in that, especially if it's through like AI workflows. You're just there to basically get the job done. So that's the problem that's the problem that needs to be looked at more, is like identifying what permissions you actually need, what's permissions that you're going to need once it's your environment. Yeah. So this is where the ugly stuff basically lives. So ransomware leak sites, public shame as leverage. So they'll make a post on Twitter, their own kind of Tor onion site, saying, I've compromised this company, this is my data I've sold, please come on and try and buy it. Or they might do it as more of a way of targeting a company to basically trick them, essentially because in terms of the recent legislative stuff in the UK, companies have been urged by the government to not pay ransomware kind of demands. They're being urged to kind of more build up your backups and your procedures in terms of that. They don't want you to pay for it because that's the end goal of these operators. Because ransomware is popular because they get paid. If they don't get paid, then it becomes a dead kind of basically approach for them. Unless it's purely destructive. If it's purely destructive, then that's what they're doing. They don't care about financial gain. Then that's the other problem with that. Stolen data, so underground markets, so breach forums, XSS, more if you're Russian and then kind of closed off Telegram channels will sell kind of initial access stuff with info stealer logs, corporate access, breach dumps often get traded, or kind of they'll get they'll take breaches from like over years and bundle them all into like a super breach dump and then post it and say, hey guys, here's creds from these years all together, have a look, and then they'll chuck it in their info stealer or kind of their whatever tool they do for like reconnaissance in terms of brute forcing and try and get into those accounts at that time. So what do we do? What do we do with this? So we monitor, kind of do automated scraping with like your threat intelligence platform tool, and then require an analyst to review it. So that'll be company mentions, employees, any domains that have been leaked, leaked credentials for, say, any various employees. It could be someone in marketing, the CEO, whichever. You'd hope it's not the CEO or anyone, to be honest. And then you have the early warning stuff, which will be like these kind of measures or methods that will allow for you to be alerted for any early warning attacks. So any vulnerabilities being exploited, or any financial companies targeted, or not even financial, but any company being targeted, really. And the strategic signal of which sectors are being hit. So I mentioned No Name 057. There was, for a while there, someone gained access into their kind of automated tool that picked out what targets they're going to hit. So a lot of companies will build like automations around that to identify which sector's being hit next. Yeah. And then basically we go on to the next one with the threat hunting, where you assume you're already breached. You basically, alerts will catch kind of old attacks, so you need to do that proactive hunting to identify if there's anything dormant within your environment, and to identify any APTs. And essentially you're using intel to build a hypothesis and perform this hunt. And just to end it off quickly, there's AI. AI is obviously the topic of the last talk in this one. Threat actors are using AI to perform phishing, malware, and building up fake websites and doing kind of deep fakes of your voice, your face. So that's kind of the main thing. So that's basically the approach on the attacker side. In terms of defenders, agentic AI, SOC, having AI do the more triaging of low-hanging fruit of alerts, do the low, medium alerts, so that you have a human to review more high and critical kind of more alerts in that case. And then as well, blocking any verified malicious infrastructure, do LLM-assisted hunt queries. Again, build that knowledge, build like kind of more context around it, rather than just doing the same prompt. And then automated isolation of compromised systems. Again, this probably depends on the scope and what you feed the data, because you don't want to automatically like say isolating a production server that it's incorrectly deemed as malicious. That could be the risk behind that. And then the unglorious truth about threat intelligence: sometimes legitimate artifacts get flagged. So AWS, so like Microsoft infrastructure, AWS will sometimes get flagged because they'll use like VMs and stuff to kind of target more companies. So it still requires that whole manual review. You don't want to automatically ingest these artifacts, because sometimes it could, overload your security teams, and it'll cause a lot of false positives to occur. So yeah, to summarize it, basically kind of three things you probably should, like, if you want kind of keen to look at, is read a threat report, read the CrowdStrike one, or Mandarin, Google, Microsoft, whichever. Kind of just get the kind of the idea of what threat intelligence looks like from a more of a core kind of enterprise side of things. Spin up a MISP, an OpenCTI server. It's free. It's on GitHub. You can host on Docker, Kubernetes, and audit a dependency tree on one of your packages if it's like one you've recently installed that's just been created. Sometimes that's a risk. And yeah, that's a QR code for the CrowdStrike threat report if anyone's wanting to grab a picture of that. And that's the QR code there's to the LinkedIn.
Guys, we're a little bit out of time. I will probably ask you not to spend time on questions,
yeah.
My bad. Well, two things. The first thing, we have an after party now, and I asked Artur to, for those who wants to stay for the after party, to lead him toward the pub, and you can stay there, we can chill and continue our discussion and everything further. And while we wrapping things up, you can ask Cameron can stay and you can ask him any questions towards his talk, and maybe while we just put everything back, and maybe you want to go to the pub and talk to him as well there, which is also I guess is great idea. So sorry about this. We should probably keep time frame a little bit better. My bad. I'll promise to keep it better next time. Maybe one quick question, little bit, if someone have something really short. Let's do it.
Question about all of the vulnerabilities in packages at the moment in package managers. Is there any practical advice around that? Sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing.
So in terms of the question, it was more how to tackle kind of vulnerabilities or in various packages is essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the example, if you have automatic updates on, you might get caught by,
Yeah, sometimes it could be like having like tools in place to kind of monitor like kind of more of your cloud or like package-based stuff. So like Sneak is kind of like the good one for like analyzing like kind of your more projects and packages, as well as like in terms of more of the cloud infrastructure stuff. There's Wiz or like Wiz Code as well, analyzes more to say like it'll scan your cloud environment. It'll tell you if it's seen this package in this campaign, and it'll give you like the remediation steps essentially. That's probably the more practical side of it. I think there'll probably be more like solutions that you can install on your machine that will help scan more of your dependencies, or even leverage AI to do a scan of a dependency. Because there's the npm registry that you could go on, review it manually, or just ask ChatGPT or Claude to do like your whole like kind of dependency review and analysis. Again, leverage kind of AI LLMs to your advantage, rather than like save all the manual kind of work as well, but then also making sure like it's read like the prompts if it's good and it's kind of more the information's correct, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess let's stop here. The final wrapping like comment, I would like to say thank you to Alan for his questions, keeping us here.